everybody, welcome back to the Edge Report. I'm your host, Chris Moeller. On this show, we spend a lot of time talking about the future of housing, communities, and the systems that shape how we live. Today, we're shifting from the developer's perspective to the planner's perspective. My guest is Tim Corcoran, Director of Planning for the City of South Bend, Indiana. Tim has earned a national reputation for challenging conventional planning practices and helping communities rethink zoning, neighborhood development, and what it takes to create places where people actually want to live. What I'm looking forward to today is exploring the intersection between planning and stability. We talk a lot about building more housing in America, but what does it actually take to build stronger neighborhoods? How do cities lower barriers to good development? And how do we create communities that don't just grow, but become more resilient over time? Tim, welcome to the Edge Report. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
So before we jump into planning and housing, I want to start where I always do. Tell us a little bit about you, how you found your way into city planning, and what keeps you excited about the work you're doing.
Yeah. So, out of high school, I thought I wanted to be an architect, and I went to Ball State, which is in Muncie, Indiana, to get an architecture degree, which is where I discovered town planning. And at the time, I'm not sure I even knew that there was a job that you could do town planning, and it really appealed to me. And so I went in that direction. The thing though that was really interesting was that there are parts of the degree where you were still drawing, where you're still doing some design, neighborhood design, and other things. And at the time, I'm not even sure the concept of the term urban design had really kind of come to the forefront. I feel like it was just something that was kind of new. And it was the urban design side of things that I really gravitated towards. And I think it was that idea of drawing and the architecture side, but also the large scale planning side and how those things kind of came together. Eventually, I moved to Sydney, Australia, where I did a master's degree in urban design and town planning. And shortly afterwards, started my career there in a small urban design firm, which I think is absolutely where I started to get my understanding and the values that I am preaching today in South Bend in terms of urbanism and how to get things done, how to think at a big scale, but also really dive into the details of things as well. So yeah, it's been a long and interesting journey. So yeah, I've lived all over the place, but came back to South Bend in 2016 to take the job as the director of planning for the city of South Bend.
Yeah, it's a big, complicated recipe. Urban planning is, right. So one thing you may not know about me is that I'm a foodie and I love to cook and I love to make correlations between food and housing and planning because it's relatable to people. One of those books that I enjoy a lot, and you may have heard of, is Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Have you ever heard of that book?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so the premise is simple. If you understand those four fundamental elements, you can make any dish better. So it sort of leads me to my first question, and maybe the way we'll theme this thing is like, if you were writing Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat for city planning or urban planning, like, let's break that down. Do you have any four essential elements that we could start with?
Well, yeah, I think if for folks who are looking to maybe get into this, whether they want to potentially be a consultant or work for a city, to me, that urban design side of planning, I think, set me apart a little bit within maybe the Midwest, not necessarily the entire, where there's a lot of skill sets on the coasts, but I think understanding the physical form, like how things fit together, is a really important piece. Then learning about the values and the principles of urban design and how those things create great places. So you understand like what are the components of a building, how do these building components fit together, but then how do those components create a great street and neighborhood and town or city? And then also really being able to engage with residents or stakeholders to help people understand the values and why those things are important to making your community a more resilient place. I'm sure there's other things, but those are the things that I talk about kind of on a daily basis, whether it's with my staff or in a community meeting, is really, trying to explain those values and why they're important in placemaking and resiliency for a city.
Yeah, I love that. You said the word values 3 times. I always talk about value and benefit. There's a guy that I quote a lot from the Long Now Foundation talk. His name is Indy Johar, and he talks about how we've in the last 40 or 50 years we've kind of become what he calls shitty capitalists because we're not talking about taking advantage of value and benefit. We stop with the economics. So let's double click on values a little bit because the aesthetic versus engagement versus value. That's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to build value in a lot of different ways. So how does that perspective hit from your side?
It all really does depend on your audience. So if you're talking with residents or you're talking with developers or you're talking with the mayor, there's different ways to kind of approach this. So if you're just strictly thinking about it from a city perspective, we need to build in ways that are sustainable and not necessarily like the techno sustainability, but like long-term construction technology, like the stuff that made cities last for hundreds, if not, thousands of years, right? So we need to build better, like the value of building in the construction industry and creating more resilient buildings that can last through the test of time. I think people don't think about how building beautiful buildings contributes to both the long-term value of a place and all of these things start to add up to like true actual like market value for a place where those things are not only creating more say per acre tax revenue but they do it for a longer and longer time, right? So I think from a city perspective that's super important. From a resident perspective, values about housing affordability or housing choice, and these things are all kind of like tied together. And then it's how do you get a developer, especially in a place like South Bend, where our market is kind of marginal when it comes to new construction, where there's appraisal gaps and other things that, are forcing you to try to do things more economically or cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get folks to build in a better way that overall means your community is a more valuable place? And I mean that both financially, but also in the way that like people just value it in themselves, that they want to be here, they want to live here, their children want to stay here, businesses want to move here because people care about it and it's a lovable place, and I think these things kind of all add up to, a lovable community that you want to take care of, right? So it's a multifaceted way. It's both financial, but it's also kind of emotional at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, so much of our communities are rooted in stability, right? We're looking for multi-generational roots, which means durability. To me, that's a word that continues to be missing from the lexicon, especially in the lowercase or even uppercase affordable housing conversation. Is we're struggling right now with, is it an economics issue or is it an inventory issue? I believe in housing just like I believe in energy. We need all electrons right now. We also need all housing. So, to me, it's not one or the other. That there's we can have that conversation, go down that slide. But the reality is, we really, in order to talk about affordability, we have to first define durability so that we can talk about total life cycle cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it feels like we're in a race to the bottom so often when we're talking to people who are, wanting to build a new apartment building or especially light tech projects kind of bug me a little bit. Like I like them. We need the low income housing, but it always feels like they're value engineering out all the things that make this a place that people want to live in and want to live in long term. And durability is something that we used to do very well, whether it was houses or new office buildings or apartment buildings. And you can see that in, the first, second generations of buildings, not only in towns like South Bend, but, you go to New York and Chicago, and you can see these beautiful pieces of architecture that, as a composition, that you would, they're amazing places that fill you with, interest and joy, right? And I think we've lost a lot of that. And I wonder if it's something where there was a time when whether it was someone who was wanting to build a new building, they were trying to like outcompete their neighbor. They wanted to like show them up a little bit and who could build bigger, who could build better, who could build a more beautiful building as a legacy, right? And I think today we don't think about that as like the legacy of an individual building, and thus you sort of lose the legacy of the community in general. And too often it's just a does it meet the metrics of a spreadsheet without thinking about all these other things. We've just boiled it down to like a spreadsheet design.
Yeah, it's
And
to
I
get
think
the start,
I think we're losing
right?
out.
Unfortunately, the goal is the start, right? It's always that. It's always first cost. It's always what does it take to get the project going. There's tons of information out there. You and I don't know each other too well, but I've got 20 years of development experience, so we've kind of been a part of building just about everything. And there's a difference between building something that has a start, that has a ribbon cutting that is built to suit, and then, the maintenance of that asset versus something that is durable, that is then becomes a responsibility and stewardship of that asset. Those are not
And
the
maybe
same
it's hard to
projects.
be durable when our financial system or the way the economics of real estate is one in which you build the building, you stabilize it, and then you turn around and sell it to private equity or something like that, right? Rather than this is a something that you hold on to for life. It's part of your family's legacy, right? I
Yeah.
don't think we think about things like that anymore. And I wonder like how we could get back to a model that encouraged that a little bit more.
Mhm.
And so, that's something that I think a lot about and wonder how we can try to make that happen again.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I'm steadfastly focused on with our Pathway Communities model. The inspiration comes from the fact that we have a family farm. So I'm the director of land management for the family farm, and it's a regenerative practice family farm. It's small, 160 acre, small local producer, silvopastoral. So when I'm there, all I'm thinking about is improving the land
Yeah.
and leaving it for my kids, like as far out as I could possibly envision. So I'm planting trees that I'll never sit under, right? Because that's what you do when you steward land. But then I come back to work and I look at the specs on a traditional multifamily project and I'm like, dude, in like 5 years, we're going to have water intrusion issues. It's going to have mold. Our RTUs are 40 feet in the air. Those are going to start to pop. Like, this is 15 years of time. We're not stewarding this asset at all. We're just worried about the start.
I think your analogy of the farm is really apt, and it's one of the things that we talk to our small scale developer community about. If you pay attention to folks like the Incremental Development Alliance or other groups like them, they talk about finding your farm, and your farm can be the neighborhood that you live in, and it's the place that you want to improve over your life, that you've committed to a place and you want to see that place grow and improve. And your motivation for that is not necessarily to make money right away, right? But you know that over time and the efforts that you put in, and then the efforts of others who, see the work that's being done and want to be part of that, starts to grow, that neighborhood or that place. And it does become more valuable over time, but you do it incrementally. You do it with like-minded people, but you commit yourself to that place. And I think that can be something that happens a lot more organically in maybe a neighborhood scale. I think it starts to fall apart a little bit as you scale up into larger buildings. And I think that's where a city can kind of come in and play a role to figure out how do we cultivate that same sort of ethos with people. And it's interesting. I mean, I just used a few words that already are like farming related, cultivate and whatever. But like it's that's I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I love it. I'm a card carrying member of InkDev, so I wave it proudly. And I love some of the emerging leadership that's coming out of there. I love Eric Kronberg's work. Aaron Lubeck is actually Rocket Shop is the group that's doing our current design work, schematic design work for our project in Hudson, North Carolina. So Aaron and I have become kindred spirits over the years, and I'm a firm believer in that sort of human scale, right? It's human scale development. So pocket neighborhoods, cottage courts, walkability, density, making a difference with 2.5 acres rather than trying to think about making a difference with 250 units.
Right. Yeah, why does everything have to be 250 units?
Because it's optimized per square foot, because our
Exactly.
econometrics run off of the square foot. And that's so many of the conversations, and so much of my writing lately has been, conversations with developers that their projects don't pencil. And they call on me saying, how are you developing right now? Because my projects don't pencil. And I always keep this over here. There's supposed to be four. So I keep four pencils on my desk and I say, well, which pencil are you using? There's a golf pencil. That's kind of the deal maker's pencil that, happens out on the golf course. There's the average day number two Ticonderoga. That's like, the bread and butter pencil. You got the architect's mechanical pencil, and then you got a construction pencil. And the reality is that it's somewhere blended between all four of those is where your pencil is going to pencil. And you're just looking at it from too narrow of a perspective, and you're not accounting for things like value and benefit and durability and
Well,
stability.
I think the word you used was optimized, and I'm not sure humans like to be optimized. So, and so, I get it. I totally understand. Like, this is not, I don't push back a ton on this, but I think a lot about how can we still create a great place and a great building that also is one that humans love.
Yeah, so what do we need to do? Like the noise right now that's out there in LinkedIn world and X and all the places where there's social noise is, we have an economics issue, we have a housing inventory issue, we have a zoning issue. I mean, clearly the answer is yes, right, to all of that. But how do we isolate that? How do we like get like from your perspective with policy and zoning, right? If that's where we want to focus, where do we start there with our conversations with our local officials?
Well, yeah, I think like policy to me is the easiest thing to do in the sense that like for zoning policy specifically, whenever I talk to other communities about how they can start to affect change in their town, in their neighborhood, is that zoning is like the easiest thing to change because you can just change a number from 1 unit to 4 units. It's literally a PDF document or something like that, right? Now, politically, the political capital that might have to go into doing that could be a lot, right? But from a pure economic point of view, changing your zoning ordinance is the easiest thing you can do. So it should be the first thing that people really think about is how do I make it easier to do good things? Zoning ordinances are blunt instruments. Too often they're about trying to stop bad things, and I'm not even sure they do a good job of that, but they certainly do a good job of preventing good things from happening by right. And no matter how good your zoning ordinance is, bad things are going to happen, and bad buildings are, whatever the case. And I think that's where having a really sort of trained staff who think beyond just call it the typical perhaps planning degree. And that's where I think I keep coming back to urban design as being really important, the way urban designers think about places and how they can rethink a person's project. So what we do here in South Bend is I've empowered my team to think of every project that comes in the door through the building department as your project. And if you think it can be done better, well, let's redesign it for them. And if there's variances needed, we can use that as a tool to reshape the project. Oftentimes developers, so many developers, I'd say the vast majority, they just want their project to go through the system smoothly. And I think if you have staff on board and you've shaped the project to create, to address those values that are those values of creating great places, and then you back them, and now you're a partner with that developer. And if they do need a variance or a rezoning, the staff are in support. We talk to council members, we help smooth that pathway forward for them. And so now you're building a relationship and you're building a culture too, not just with the council, with developers, and you're raising expectations in your community at the same time. So what you do is you open up the zoning ordinance to allow for good things. You shape bad developments to make them better. And there's a lot of work in that. And you take good developments and try to make them great developments. And then you start to really set the floor in a way. And it can be for anything. Even the sort of the low end of things, gas stations or self-storage facilities or something like that. Or dollar stores, even those things, you can make them incrementally better so that if the next one comes in, you just point to the one and you say, if you do it like that, it's going to go through pretty easily, right? So there's changing your code is the number one thing you can do to improve things.
Yeah, a lot of that resonates with me. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, so and that's where you and I met, the Housing Innovation Alliance meeting, Housing Innovation Summit. We have almost a 700-page UDO here, and about 650 pages of that is case law. So we are like both sides of the coin. We are suffering from our own success because we have built a lot, but we've also lost almost everything in the path. we did nothing, very little to protect any of our historic buildings and left very little evidence in its path that we had a history back into the 1800s because everything's now glass and shiny and clean, which
Yeah.
is two sides of the coin. It's great, but then we've sort of lost our past too. So let's talk about that a little bit. The responsibility associated with, I'm a big fan of adaptive reuse and incorporating adaptive reuse into a plan. The first thought is always cut down the tree and knock down the building. Should we start there?
But I think that you have to look at saving. If you can save the building, you should try to save the building. That's my kind of first point or first thought. Even if the building is sort of a suburban style building in an urban context, there are ways to adapt to reuse those. There are ways to potentially add on to those buildings that can create that urbanism that you should be shooting for. So while I accept that demolitions and rebuilds are kind of part of an evolution of a place, especially in a place where the South Bend's problem is we tore down all of our great urban buildings and then we built suburban office style buildings in our downtown. And now when people it's hard to adaptively reuse sort of modernist commercial buildings. I mean, they can be reused you can switch them to residential, but still, if there's big seas of parking lots around them, or they're not fronting the street, they're not creating that great walkable experience. Sometimes maybe it is better to try to go, hey, we made some really bad mistakes in their urban renewal time, and now we're trying to rectify those things by building in a traditional way or using traditional values again about how we create place. So yeah, I'm all for historic preservation. In fact, my team has historic preservation folks on it. But I also think we should try to re-urbanize our place. And if there's a sort of a suburban style building in the way that and if it can't be reused effectively, then thinking about how we demo that, start over again is there. That's an option as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you playing along because you can see that I'm trying to get at all the hot button issues, all the conversion discussions about how do we repurpose office into residential, and
Yeah.
the fact that it's not quite that easy for a lot of different reasons. A small percentage of buildings even qualify to allow that to happen. Then the zoning,
Yeah.
then the money. So it's like it's all connected. It's all complicated.
From a zoning point of view, the conversions are easy here. I think the place that we see problems with conversions is usually like those larger Victorian style houses in historic neighborhoods that are too large for people to really take care of. I mean, they're expensive, beautiful houses to take care of. And so, the people want to cut those up into multiple units. And that's where you really start to get a lot of political pressure to stop things like that from happening, where neighbors in neighborhoods like that, use that historic preservation side of things to try to stop that because they've seen so many bad things happen as a consequence of it. And I wonder if it really takes a place to become like very valuable, like where rents are high, where landlords take care of things, because if they don't, people are going to move out and choose to live someplace else, and in which something like that becomes more acceptable. But in South Bend, that's where there's a little bit of tension there, is in the adaptive reuse of those larger sort of most often historic homes for sort of multifamily or, shared housing or something like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. The housing typology becoming obsolete where, families are getting smaller, but houses are remaining to be big,
Or
right? You've
bigger.
got this beautiful house that two people are going to live in, and it's, $1.5 million to get in, and then renovations plus maintenance or whatever
Yeah.
forever. It could easily be 2 or 3 units responsibly, but folks that are in wealth and historical preservation typically don't like to think that way. It's a single family home, and someone else needs to own it and live in it.
Right. And and what we found too is that a lot of these conversions have been done in very poorly. And what they end up doing, at least here, is that, I'm kind of just guessing into the past, but they couldn't sell the home. The market was declining, banks weren't lending, or the appraisals were dropping. And so, they couldn't even sell some of these places. And so, cutting it up into 1 or 2 or 3 units made a lot of sense. But they don't spend a lot of money to make it a really livable place. And then that just has another downcycling effect, not only for that particular structure, but then for that street as well. And so I don't know where that balance is because I do like I get it. Like our household sizes are smaller. We need to use the stuff that we have more effectively. But how can we still address the livability of these places at the same time to ensure that the folks that end up living in those places, they are living in a good place in a quality unit that has value that then attracts people who want to be a part of that neighborhood, take care of it. Yeah, so again, it's a delicate balance there, and yeah, luckily we don't have a ton of pressure to do that, and so
Yeah, every market's a little bit different. I want to switch gears just a second, and I want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners the work that you presented alongside Ivory Innovations. The name of the working session was Strategic Actions Cities Are Taking to Lower Costs. And
yeah,
you did an awesome job explaining. We don't have the visual representation here, and you're probably not prepared to share your screen, but can you give our listeners a little bit of an opportunity to understand what you did with densities and rezoning to allow for those opportunities to lower costs, along
sure.
with Ivory's insights?
Yeah, the Ivory Innovation publishes a book called The Little Book of Low Cost, High Impact Housing Solutions. I had to look over, I have it on my desk here. And South Bend is highlighted as one of the, like an exemplary project. And the initiative that Ivory highlights is our pre-approved plans that we've developed for South Bend. And our pre-approved plan program is kind of the cherry on top of a lot of work that's happened over the course of the last, say, decade. Zoning reform is really the big one, but then also looking at process reform internally, looking and partnering, not like kind of really thinking about partnering with your own building department or public works and thinking of everybody as a team, and that we're Team South Bend trying to figure out ways to make housing cheaper, to re to repopulate parts of the city that have been abandoned for a long time and all the barriers that get in the way of building a house. The thing that really struck me a few years back before we had this program was that, well, two things. One, home builders, your production home builder type of company, they have not built a single house in South Bend in, I don't know, a generation. All right. Maybe on the edges on sort of Greenfield, yes. But when it came to our urban neighborhoods, our legacy neighborhoods, they're not building in these places. In fact, it's only CDCs, neighborhood associations, things like that, Habitat for Humanity, groups like that are the only ones willing. And then those groups were finding that there were only one or two different builders that were even willing to build their houses for them, right? So we have like the market or the list of companies that could help you just shrink when you're trying to do infill development, when you're trying to heal these neighborhoods that have seen so much damage that has occurred in communities a lot of times in the Midwest and post-industrial communities. But what we're finding is that there were so many folks in these neighborhoods that wanted to do something positive. All right. Again, they were finding their farm. They were trying to figure out how to grow their neighborhood, literally grow, how do you build a house? And I think people underestimate how difficult it is just to build a house.
Yes.
And so we started having these conversations with folks, and all the words that we would say to each other, we were all saying the same things. We're all like, yeah, Chris, I really like what you're saying there. Yeah, if you do that, we can figure this out. But as soon as we got the drawing, as soon as we got the house plan, where maybe we're partnering with this organization where the city's actually putting money into it. Like, there is no way we are going to fund this house. I mean, they don't know how to design it. They were thinking of themselves as like a custom home builder, and they were not good. And I remember the moment where I was on a Teams call. This is during the lockdown with some of my team members, and I was just like, gosh, guys, we might as well just do this ourselves. Like, and that became the genesis of the pre-approved housing plans. All right. It was really, for us, it was a design issue, and it was that raising expectations that I talked about earlier. And so we developed those plans, and then we started working with those well-intentioned partners that wanted to do good work. And then we would tie developer agreements to pre-approved plans. It teaches them how to build. It sets expectations, and there's a level of certainty that comes out of that with the neighborhood. So the neighbors are cool with it because it blends in, it fits into the neighborhood. And once it's built and they've done a few of these things, well, now they're kind of expert home builders, right? And so if they want to do something a little bit different next time, we now have faith in each other that they'll be able to do something positive and that is contextually appropriate, that meets the needs of the city, meets the needs of the neighborhood, and meets the needs of the developer as well. That we're all kind of working, all in line with each other. And so that's the pre-approved plans were really, we've gotten a lot of press and accolades for that, but it's really the cherry on top of a lot of work that it's built upon.
Yeah. So I heard like throughput and predictability and consistency were sort of outcomes of all of that hard work, or could potentially be outcomes of that hard work. Anything, in terms of city actions cities are taking to lower costs, any conversations around co-ops or community land trusts or lot size minimums?
Yeah. So, well, from a lot, the easy part of that question, lot size minimums, we really reduced them down to like 15 feet in South Bend. So, not eliminated them altogether, but pretty low. And so that, again, that's just a zoning thing. That's a text change amendment in your zoning ordinance. That's easy. The community land trust is a really interesting model, one in which we do have a CLT in South Bend, started by the University of Notre Dame, and they've realized that all the hard work that they've been doing since the 90s have now completely made the neighborhoods around Notre Dame unaffordable for everybody. And so they're trying to preserve the last kind of holdouts in this neighborhood to preserve the affordability there through a community land trust. And so there aren't many units in the CLT yet, but we're partnering with local CDCs and the university to continue to build more units in the community land trust. And I think the challenge that folks will start to realize, and these are the things that are always intertwined, and it's the things that planners and tend not to be very well versed in, is the banks and I wouldn't say exactly opposed, but they don't understand community land trusts very well. How do you lend on to people who don't own the land under the house? Like what, they get a little, they could go research it and find out like these things exist around their country and that it's okay. But yeah, like socializing these ideas with your financial institutions is an important part of that. I'm not the expert in that, but I do know that that's the biggest kind of challenge right now to CLTs. Co-ops, there aren't a lot in South Bend, but there's a lot more people talking about it, and so we're already thinking about things like, do we need to change our definition of family in the zoning ordinance to help co-ops be more successful, or what are the regulatory things that are getting in the way, or are there still things that we want to regulate? And our kind of mantra is regulate the things that matter. And again, it's usually about how the buildings present to streets and how they help create places. But how do we negotiate the NIMBYism that usually goes along with sort of shared housing projects, where neighbors are a little skeptical about will these developments, will they take care of it? The typical traffic issues, or whatever the case may be, that is because it's scary and different and new, and so how can we try to regulate these things in ways that allow them to happen, but then also provide a few safeguards or rails so that residents can feel comfortable with them. And then maybe over time you realize that those guardrails are not necessary any longer, and you start to eliminate those. And that's kind of another key kind of principle, is that incremental changes in everything we do, whether it's code reform or neighborhood development, is we might put a code in or a rule in place that we only partially believe in, but as a way to get something through, and then over time show council members, the mayor, neighbors, that we could probably get rid of this rule now, make it easier for people to do these things, because the impacts that everybody thought were going to be bad never really materialized.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of thoughts there. So, with co-ops and CLTs, one of the things that I think is interesting is that cities and municipalities around the country start to think about things as farms and stewardship, and not sell off the tax encumbered or defaulted or parcels that are in receivership to the lowest bidder, but potentially collect them and steward those properties and allow building rights to happen on top of them, but actually keep the land. Because the one thing that we've learned over time in our urban centers is they're not making any more of it. So, it'd be interesting if we would take a new perspective of that, and our elected officials and folks who are making these decisions would look at it in terms of stewarding those defaults and stewarding that receivership or that encumbered property rather than selling it to the lowest bidder to try to decouple or defray the cost of development. I get that it's a positive intended consequence is what I call it, right? As a developer, I get these all the time. Hey, are you interested in, putting in a bid? We've got 26 distressed properties. And I'm like, man, I would love to, but I would love it even more if you kept them and just gave me the opportunity to develop on top of it. And like you collect, mailbox money, what I call mailbox money. And then when we're done and our durability of our affordable product or, its purposeful life is complete, well, then we deconstruct what's there, or there's an opportunity for the municipality or the town or the city to then take a look around 30, 40, 50 years from now and see whether or not it makes sense to maybe have a different use. Longer term perspective, definitely not something that I've seen a lot of yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing more of it.
The ideas that we're exploring here is a trust model where, let's call it the South Bend Trust, becomes the equity partner in a project, has a long-term stake, kind of takes the place of private equity and the rate of return that private equity demands of a project, and instead looks at how with a lower rate of return that the trust would want, we can get durability, we can get more beautiful buildings, we can have longer term ownership over these buildings, and then as these buildings kind of move through and pay off their mortgages and the debt on that building, then the trust then not only is collecting the rent that pays off the debt service, but then once the debt service is gone, those buildings could be making a lot of money for the trust that can then invest in new buildings or in places that no one will invest in, difficult neighborhoods or affordable housing, or buying land for community land trusts, So I think there's a financial mechanism or model there that I think every community should be thinking about, because it's almost like we want to own ourselves. And, if we own ourselves, then we can manage our own destiny. And if we don't, it's just, we're left to market forces that do not have our best interests in mind.
That's right.
And so, yeah, that's something that we've been thinking a lot about here. Hopefully get something implemented soon and get some first projects off the ground that can, start to create that community wealth.
Yeah, there's a couple of cool models out there. The OPCO-PropCo model is one of them, and City as LP, as limited partner, is one. We're exploring a lot of that ourselves because we believe that the capital stack should be more of a capital ecosystem, and the city has something that the developers, small incremental developers, don't have. That's a AAA rating or a bonded rating. So as an LP, you could come in potentially and underwrite the debt with the bank if the community bank knows that you're willing to put up, some of your credit, versus a small investor like me that has to personally guarantee my kids' future and their braces and their college education to get that construction loan, for the partnership, which could be the LP, which could be the community partner trust. There, through Community Reinvestment Act, even in a community bank that's willing to listen, that partnership could potentially play out and really work well for all three people plus the community, right? So if the intended result is housing and it's stable housing, the city can act as a stabilizing partner, underwrite the debt for the bank. The community bank can then lend the construction note and projects can happen. So the pencils, it's not just a capital stack. We keep adding layers to capital, and what ends up happening is distributed loads become too much and projects, collapse. Looking at things more in terms of an ecosystem than a capital stack is the way I like to look at it. So let's shift gears a little bit. What kind of exciting projects right now are happening in South Bend? Anything that you want to share with the listeners or double click on? I know you mentioned that a lot of the emerging work that's happening out of Notre Dame. I know there's a lot of cool stuff in faith-based housing right now, because faith-based housing initiative, we've come to realize that a lot of the faith-based organizations own a lot of land in the country. So anything you want to highlight or share with us that you got?
We've got a lot going on, Chris. This is a transformational moment in South Bend's history. And I think one of the biggest reasons for this is that we've had a lot of consistency at the top. The current mayor, he's on his finishing, he's coming close to his second term, but he was the director of community investment during Mayor Pete Buttigieg's administration. So we're talking, 10 years of consistency. And that consistency in leadership has led to a consistency in delivery of a vision of our downtown and neighborhood plans. We're looking at about 1,000 new units in downtown South Bend that will be delivered in the next 3 years. And like that might not impress people in Charlotte or Austin or big cities where lots of things are happening, but this is absolutely like insane for us, right? Now, our downtown development is great, and downtowns are super important. They're the thing that is a pride of place for a community, but the thing that really has excited me the most is our infill housing work that we've done, again, in neighborhoods that have appraisal gap issues that were redlined in the past, that during the Great Recession just bottomed out and were had seen so much damage. And I use the word heal these neighborhoods very specifically because I don't like revitalize. Obviously gentrification comes up, and this is really about healing neighborhoods and healing cities, and the work we've been doing is just great. And when I drive down some of these streets to see these new houses built in collaboration with folks like Habitat for Humanity or other CDCs, and when I start to hear our production home builders start to go like, oh, that's interesting, South Bend's doing some interesting things, maybe we should talk to them. They're starting to, we're starting to get those folks wanting to be interested in building in South Bend again. Last year, we produced more single family homes, detached townhouses, duplexes, in that range than the entire unincorporated St. Joe County where South Bend sits. It's the first time that's happened since 1960. And I'm really proud of that because there's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of time that's gone into banking the land. We had to mow it for a long time, not even knowing how we were going to, rebuild. Code changes, pre-approved plans, sewer water lateral grants to help with infrastructure for infill lots. So, I feel like that we do that really well now. This was something that it took us a while to figure out how to tackle each of these problems that started to come along. And now we're looking at, brownfields that we're turning into brand new neighborhoods. So we're taking, instead of infill, now we're infilling like neighborhoods into the city. And that's the next thing that we're working on right now. So we've got 2 sites that we've in the process of either remediation or we're in engineering for new streets, and we're doing the design. We're ensuring that the urban design is good. And then we create basically shovel-ready lots for developers or builders, let's say. And what do builders like to do? They like to build. They don't want to do anything else. They don't want to get a variance. They don't want to go to council. They don't want to, they don't want to talk to anybody except for the person who's buying the house, right?
That's right.
And so, let the builders build and let the city do what the city does best, which is the infrastructure. And in our case, like a real focus on urban design as well. And all the subtleties that go into that, whether it's, lot layouts or working with utilities to make sure that, all those little boxes are behind things or hidden, and, and making sure we get all the water and sewer lines right. And then we get all that, we do that. And then the builders are like, this is great. Like, can we just do this all the time? So, we're moving into that territory now when it comes to new neighborhood development and how the city is taking a lead in how that all comes about. And rather than letting somebody come to us and tell us what they want to do, we're going out and saying, be a partner with us in this. And this is kind of our stake in it. We're going to do the infrastructure for you, but you have to agree to both how the neighborhood is laid out, the urban design, as well as providing for a range of housing typologies, across the board. So
I love it. It sounds like you're really doing a good job hiring and training within to create that acumen around. So many cities and municipalities that I speak with don't they say the exact opposite. They say, we're not in this business. We're not in the business of development. We're not in the business of building. And they box check. And unfortunately, that acumen is missing from a lot of perspectives. So, kudos.
I think the narrative that is, out there nationally is, that, government is inept, government can't do anything, all these negative elements about what government cannot do or should not do. And from my experience here in South Bend, if not for the local government, nothing would happen. Or the things that did happen, if you just let it for market forces, it would not be good, right?
Right.
And so I'm a true believer that your local, state, federal government, they have to work really well, and to think of government as a partner in projects, and the government needs to think about themselves as a partner too. My perspective is we're pro business, we're pro development. We will do what it takes to get it done. But you also have to think about it how we need it to happen for the financial resiliency of South Bend. So it's not just all about what you want, it's what we want, and we're working together. And if we do the right things for each other, your development is going to be very successful, and so is South Bend at the same time.
100%.
And that doesn't happen without a very strong local government that believes in themselves and sees themselves as a partner. Otherwise, I think left to its own devices, like the market is not going to make communities better places. They're going to make money for somebody, and that money is going to be extracted out of the community and not necessarily reinvested, especially in places like South Bend. I'm sure there are places where that is not always the case, but that's what we're dealing with here. If we don't do it ourselves, no one's going to do it for us.
Yeah, well, lean integrated project delivery, requires everybody to come to the table at the beginning and align their incentives. So, taking a look at that and getting it away from that traditional procurement low bid RFP model is really, really important, because if you have trusted partners and you have good contracting, meaning legal contracts up front, and the incentive discussion or incentive structure has been clearly discussed and transparent right from the beginning, building the project should be the fun part. It should be the easy part. It's the actual delivery of the strategy at that point. And that's really the perspective that we're taking at Orion Growth for our Pathway Community Project, is that it's prescriptive and it's IPD and it has all the incentives aligned at the very beginning. So look, we've got about 6 minutes left. I always promise my listeners never to go past an hour, because I understand how important time is for everybody. But we talked about a lot of things. What we haven't talked about is the skilled labor workforce and, the state of the union of your skilled labor force for trades, and how, if at all, you're starting to incorporate industrialized offsite construction and factory type housing into South Bend at all.
Yeah. Great Recession did a lot of bad things for us, right? I mean, we lost a lot of housing, or housing production, fell off a cliff, but so did all the people who were building houses, right? And we lost a lot of that labor. Labor was already expensive, and it just got more expensive. And the labor that's out there can pick and choose. And what do they choose? Like luxury housing, right? I mean, why not? I mean, that's where you make the most money. So labor costs and just finding the people to do these things is a hard part, right? So yeah, we are open to all types of construction typologies, whether it's modular or panelized. Heck, 3D printing. What's it? The cross laminated wood products and things of that nature. One of the things that I think our region is starting to get a little bit more sophisticated and interested in is, like, just next door from St. Joe County is Elkhart County, which is the home of the RV industry of the world.
Uh-huh.
And those guys know how to build, houses in a factory. They drive those houses away. But, can we, work with industries like that, show how they can convert to building modular construction or panelized construction to speed up that process and give workers the dignity of working under a roof in a climate controlled environment, where the end product is usually better than on-site stick-built construction. So I've spoken with companies in Indianapolis that are doing modular. I've pointed people in that direction, and I think the issue that we've got still that I think will start to work out is, at least the folks we've been talking to, in a one-off situation, modular has not been any less expensive, and sometimes it's a little bit more expensive. It's when you scale modular construction that you really start to save money and time, right? So I think modular and panelized, they're going to get better and better and more efficient, and I think We definitely need to see that in the housing industry. The housing industry has not kept up with the efficiency gains of other industries in the economy. And, maybe these are ways that we can, start to see some of those efficiencies take place. So yeah, we're open to it. We haven't seen a ton of it, but I'm hearing more about it every day. And I'm starting to feel like in the next couple of years, maybe most of the housing that we're going to start seeing is going to come in on a truck, whether it's panelized or, an actual module and dropped into that. So it has happened. It's not quite at scale yet, but I do see, I believe that to be the truth.
Yeah, massive opportunities in Indiana. I told you I came out of the office industry, so furniture, fixtures, and equipment was a big part of a tenant improvement project in office. And you've got a massive resource in southern Indiana in all the case goods and wood case goods industries. Jasper Desk or JSI, Jasper Seating, OFS is down that way, down in southern Indiana. And it seems to me like there could be an awesome opportunity for economic development in the state to retool or possibly look at design for manufacturing and assembly right there inside of those existing factories,
Yeah.
especially if their revenues are off because the office industry is off. So those are
Yeah.
conversations I'm actively having and trying to reach out to folks because I feel like there's a see ball, hit ball opportunity there, especially in Indiana.
I mean, those guys, they're building houses just on wheels, right? So I think it's an easier task to retool them into a 1,200 square foot house.
Yeah. So listen, this was great. I sincerely appreciate your time and all the work and energy that you're putting into South Bend and sharing your sort of open source perspective on how to do this. I think that's how we learn from each other. So how willing are you to take, calls or questions or emails from people? Do you write anywhere or
Yeah,
I
gosh,
know
Chris,
you're a busy dude. So
I started a database of people that I've talked to just on calls like this, and we're up to nearly 100 communities across North America in the last 2.5 to 3 years, sometimes twice. And so, we try our best to work with anybody. I have a soft spot for Midwest communities that are struggling, that need to figure out ways to reinvent themselves. Yeah, so if you're in Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, places like that, give us a call. Well, I'm trying to be as open with my time as I possibly can while still trying to deliver here in South Bend. But yeah, we talk to places, communities all across the country, in Canada as well, and lots of different times that I've been able to tell our story in different conferences across the country. So yeah, happy to field questions, and just note, if you're out there and you're listening, you're about to give me a call, like please be patient. But it does take some time to schedule things and get back to people. So.
yeah, so let's wrap it up with that. Three. I get this question all the time. What are three different industry events that are must visits? I'll give up the first two. I've been loving Yimby Town. Yimby Town 2026 is in Raleigh next year, so I'm pushing that already. That's actually this year in November. Just met you at the Housing Innovation Summit, which is part of the Housing Innovation Alliance. That was in Charlotte. We'll be in Charlotte again, expanding to the Midwest. By the way, not probably supposed to talk about it, but we are. We will be expanding to the Midwest. Any other events or industry places that you would like
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's two things that I'd want to kind of highlight. One is if you're a community that is looking to start to like spark something, getting in touch with the Incremental Development Alliance is probably one of the first things I would do. They come to you, right? So you don't have to go anywhere. But they're great, and it helps not only people learn how to be developers, but it teaches staff how to think like a developer, how to maybe rethink differently about the way they've been doing their job. So IncDev is a great organization, but the one that I've been going to a lot is the Congress for the New Urbanism that happens each year in different places around the country. And I know it's kind of a smaller version of the APA events that are maybe more focused on architecture and design, but it's an organization that has really been thinking very deeply about a lot of the difficult issues that we face in the world today, especially around sprawl and creating great urban places. I think that's where I got the value. My planning and urban design values was from groups and people that were part of that organization. So yeah, I always, it's always a fun time for me to go to those events.
yeah, CNU was great, and it was in Bentonville this year with Strong Towns as another one. So
Yeah.
where
Oh,
we
yeah.
just
And so, yeah, for sure. Everybody knows Strong Towns, I think. So, yeah, another great organization, a lot more grassroots on the ground type of solutions as well. And I think you got to think of things at all those scales, right?
yeah. Well, that's an awesome hit list. I think we gave people enough resources. Hopefully, we got some people's minds spinning. Again, thank you for sharing your time and all your work with everybody. I think that's what it takes is for, they always say innovation happens on the edges, and I appreciate that you took the time to share it with our listeners here and that you're open to more communication and conversation to lift all ships, so to speak. So thank you, man. I appreciate your time.
Helps. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Take care.